Have you ever poured your absolute heart and soul into a creative project? I mean, really just given it everything you have.
Oh, yeah, where it takes over your life.
Exact. Picture yourself sitting at a desk for years, injecting your own personality, your deepest quirks, your lived experiences into a character or a story until it feels like, a tangible extension of yourself.
Well, it becomes your baby, essentially.
Yeah. But now imagine waking up on a random Tuesday, scrolling through your feed, and realizing that a massive corporation you used to work for has taken that piece of your soul and handed it over to you.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. Because you created it, you breathed life into it, but legally, you don't own a single pixel of it. Visceral nightmare. And right now, that exact scenario is the collision course rocking the entire entertainment world.
It really is, yeah.
We are standing at this massive, incredibly messy intersection where human artistry is crashing head-on into the seemingly irresistible cost-cutting allure of artificial intelligence.
And I would say it is arguably the defining tension of our current era in media. I mean, we really have to recognize that this is no longer some abstract theoretical debate happening in, university philosophy department or tech incubators.
Right. It's not theoretical anymore.
Not at all. This is unfolding right now in real time on the balance sheets of the biggest studios in the world. And the shockwaves from these decisions are fundamentally altering the structural foundation of how the culture you consume is going to be manufactured going forward.
And looking at those structural foundations is our mission for this deep dive today. We're drawing heavily from a comprehensive breakdown by the commentary channel Clownfish TV,
which is a great source for this kind of industry analysis.
Yeah, and our goal today is to look past the surface level internet outrage. Because if you spend 5 minutes online, you'll see a literal tsunami of anger regarding AI in art.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
But we need to look beneath that noise to understand the brutal economic realities, the ironclad legal contracts, and the very real human cost reshaping the animation industry right beneath our feet. So, okay, let's unpack this, starting with the inciting incident that set the industry on fire.
Let's do it.
So Amazon MGM Studios has officially unveiled what they are calling their Gen AI Creators Fund. And this isn't some quiet internal test, right?
Well, not at all.
This is a massive, highly publicized initiative designed to give select creators access to professional-grade AI tools paired with the actual studio funding to produce cinematic entertainment. And out of the gate, they greenlit 3 highly controversial AI animated projects.
And, the public nature of that announcement is really the critical variable to analyze. I mean, it is a deliberate strategic maneuver by Amazon.
How so?
Well, to understand the magnitude, you have to look at the specific slate of shows they chose to greenlight. First, you have a project called Cupcake and Friends, which is based on an existing intellectual property owned by Buzz.
Right, the webcomic.
Exactly. Second, they announced a show titled Love, Diana Music Hunter, which they describe as a K-pop demon hunter concept from a creator named Albie Heck.
That sounds pretty wild.
It is. And finally, they greenlit a project called Punky, which comes from Jorge Gutierrez, who is a veteran and highly respected director in the traditional animation world.
Okay, so those are 3 wildly different demographics and styles. I mean, you have an internet humor webcomic, a highly stylized K-pop action concept, and a project from an established industry veteran.
Right, they cover completely different bases.
Yeah, the only unifying thread is this aggressive, very public embrace of AI. But looking at the reaction, I mean, animation fans and working professionals are
enraged might be an understatement.
Yeah, the animation community is arguably the most fiercely vocal anti-AI group in the entertainment. So, taking a step back, why would a behemoth like Amazon MGM intentionally kick the hornet's nest?
It's a great question.
I mean, going out and broadcasting this to the world seems like a masterclass in generating terrible public.
Well, if you view it purely through the lens of consumer public relations, sure, it seems completely counterintuitive. But if you analyze it through the mechanics of corporate signaling, it is a remarkably aggressive power play.
Okay, signaling.
Well, Amazon is, in the grand scheme of media consolidation, a titan that is essentially insulated from the day-to-day shifting winds of Twitter outrage. By shouting this initiative from the rooftops, their target audience isn't the independent animator or the vocal fan.
So who are they talking to?
Their target audience is sitting in the boardrooms of Disney, Warner Bros., and Netflix. Amazon is publicly declaring that they are seizing the initiative in what is rapidly becoming an AI arms race.
But isn't that just buying hostility for no immediate financial gain? I keep thinking of this, like a massive multinational corporation deciding to build a highly controversial, heavily polluting factory right in the middle of a tight-knit.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like they know the townspeople are going to protest. They know there will be picketing outside, but the corporation doesn't actually care about the neighbors' complaints. They just want their global rivals across the ocean to look over and see those massive smokestacks churning.
Exactly. It's all about flex.
Right. It is a display of industrial capacity. They are proving they have the output capability regardless of the local fallout.
That analogy captures the boardroom mentality perfectly, honestly.
Well,
Amazon doesn't need the townspeople to love the factory. They just need the other factory owners to be intimidated by its efficiency.
wow.
Yeah, they are planting a flag in a brand new technological frontier to prove to their peer that generative AI can be utilized for actual, scalable, studio-level production.
So it's basically a threat to the others.
Absolutely. Because if Amazon successfully demonstrates that this model drastically reduces the overhead of producing content, those other studio executives are going to be forced by their own shareholders to build identical factories.
Because they can't justify the old cost.
Right. In fact, many of those rival studios are already quietly hiring software engineers to develop proprietary AI pipelines in sequence. Amazon simply chose to be the one to break the seal publicly.
I see the financial logic there, but it creates such a bizarre contrast when you look at how legacy studios are playing their cards right now.
Oh, for sure. The strategies are wildly different.
Like Disney, for instance, recently went out of their way to explicitly guarantee that no generative AI was used in the production of Toy Story 5. They didn't just quietly avoid it. They made the absence of AI a major marketing bullet.
Like a badge of honor to protect their...
Exactly. So why the difference?
Well, the underlying math behind that contrast tells you everything you need to know about how Hollywood assesses risk. Why does Disney protect Toy Story 5 from AI cost-cutting? Because a mainline Pixar sequel is as close to a guaranteed financial juggernaut as exists in modern cinema.
Right. It's basically a life print money.
Exactly. That film carries $1 billion, perhaps $1.5 billion box office expectation. When the return on investment is a near certain, you do not introduce experimental, controversial variables that could tarnish the brand's pristine reputation.
You don't mess with a winning formula.
You really don't. You gladly spend the $200 million on human animators because you know you are making $1 billion on the back.
So you protect the golden goose by feeding it the expensive organic feed.
Well, that is exactly it.
But wait, if that's the logic, why is Amazon putting their AI money into completely unproven concepts like a K-pop demon hunter or a BuzzFeed Cupcake? If the tech is so revolutionary, why not put it on their biggest franchises like The Boys or Lord of the Rings?
Because original concepts are a massive financial gain. The failure rate for new intellectual property is staggering, right? Nobody in the Amazon boardroom actually knows if Punky Duck will find an audience.
It's a total roll of...
Right. And in the traditional pipeline, financing an unproven animated series requires millions of dollars and years of human labor. It is terrifying for risk-averse executives. Yeah. But if you can utilize the Gen AI Creators Fund to produce that exact same risky original idea for a fraction of the cost and in a third of the time,
the financial risk is suddenly mitigated.
Exactly. The proving ground for AI isn't the billion-dollar guaranteed sequel. It is the unproven original that the studio would normally be too terrified to greenlight at a full traditional budget.
Man, that ruthless financial calculus makes total sense on a spreadsheet. But to truly understand why the backlash to this is so visceral, so painful for the people in the industry, we have to pull away from the smokestacks and the corporate signaling and look at the human element.
Yes, because there is a very real human cost here.
Because it is one thing to discuss asset management in a boardroom, it is entirely another to witness a deeply personal creation getting fed into that. Which brings us to the devastating controversy surrounding Cupcake and Friends.
Yeah, the situation with the Good Advice Cupcake character is the most potent, heartbreaking case study we have right now regarding the harsh realities of corporate intellectual property in the AI age.
Let's lay out the facts of what happened here. So Lauren Brandt is the original creator of this character, the Good Advice Cupcake, which she developed while she was working as an employee at BuzzFeed.
Right, she was on staff.
And this wasn't just some random doodle assigned to her. She designed this character as a digital microphone to spread positivity. And she has stated that the character is heavily based on her own personality, her own quirks, her own voice. It was her baby.
It was deeply personal to her.
Yeah. Now, flash forward to the Amazon announcement. BuzzFeed has taken this IP, which they legally own, and sold the rights to an AI platform to produce this new show entirely without Lauren Brandt's involvement.
And her public reaction was one of profound devastation, which honestly is entirely understandable.
Totally. She released a statement saying she was absolutely horrified and disgusted. She used an incredibly evocative metaphor, saying it felt like her intestines were being pulled out of her body.
Oof, that is a brutal way to put it.
It is. Which applies to basically every staff job.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. When you are employed full-time by a corporation, whether you are sketching characters for BuzzFeed, designing backgrounds for Disney, or writing dialogue for a video game publisher, you are generating assets for the company. You do not own the copyright.
So even though she poured her soul into it, she has zero claim.
Zero. Lauren Brandt's emotional and psychological connection to the cupcake is undeniable and real, but the legal reality is that BuzzFeed holds the deed to the property.
But even acknowledging the work-for-hire reality, there's a difference between legally owning an IP and choosing to publicly humiliate the original creator by stripping the human element out.
Sure.
Like, why wouldn't BuzzFeed at least try to placate her or find a compromise? Are they just being needlessly cruel?
It isn't about cruelty. It is about sheer corporate survival. We have to contextualize BuzzFeed's current economic reality to understand their behavior. They are not operating from a position of strength or benevolence right now.
They've been struggling for a while, right?
Massively. Their stock has plummeted to catastrophic low. They recently went through a major financial restructuring where essentially they sold massive portions of themselves to Byron Allen for a fraction of their former valuation.
Wow, so they are really on the ropes.
Very much so. When a media corporation is crumbling, the executives stop looking at their intellectual property as art or culture. They look at it purely as an asset to be liquidated or monetized by any means necessary to keep the lights on.
Asset liquidation. So if licensing a cheerful cartoon cupcake to an Amazon AI project brings in a sudden influx of cash, they're going to extract that monetary value regardless of whether the original artist feels like her intestines.
Exactly. A starving corporation doesn't have the luxury of sentimentality. Furthermore, this was a highly calculated maneuver on their part. There is actually a recent precedent at BuzzFeed that explains their silence towards Brandt.
Oh, really? What was that?
Well, a short time ago, there was a similar controversy involving another BuzzFeed property called the Chicken Nugget character. In that instance, the original creator caught wind of an impending AI deal before the ink was dry, raised a massive public outcry, and actually managed to generate enough negative PR to stall or stop the project.
So they learned their lesson.
Yep.
They knew that if they went to Lauren Brandt and asked for her blessing to use the cupcake for an AI show, she would vehemently say no and start a campaign before the check.
Which would blow up the whole deal.
Exactly. So they deliberately bypassed her, finalized the deal with Amazon, and let her find out when the rest of the world. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, especially when you need the money.
It is ruthless, yes. But from a purely fiduciary standpoint, it is standard operating procedure.
Right.
Why introduce an obstacle to revenue generation when you hold the absolute legal right to proceed without them?
Right. But when this blew up in their faces, BuzzFeed did have to release a public defense. And their PR spin on this is where the conversation gets incredibly... They released a statement claiming that they actually did invite Lauren Brandt to participate in the new show, but she declined because of her stance on AI. More importantly, they heavily emphasized that human creativity, the writing, the emotional storytelling, remains the beating heart of the project.
That's the standard corporate line, right?
Yeah, their core argument is that AI is not a replacement, but merely a tool to facilitate human storytelling.
Yes. And to justify that stand, they utilized a very specific historical analogy. They compared generative AI to the Xerox photocopy technology that Walt Disney embraced in the early 1960s.
The Xerox defense.
Exactly. Their argument is that just as Disney used Xerox to make the laborious process of in-betweening, which is drawing the transitional frames of movement faster and more efficient, BuzzFeed is simply using AI as the next logical technological step to streamline production.
Okay, here's where it gets really, because I have to throw a massive flag on here.
Go for it.
I want to challenge this Xerox analogy because I think it fundamentally misrepresents the technology.
Yeah.
Look, I understand the PR angle, but let's break down the actual mechanics.
Sure.
If I am an animator in 1961, I draw a beautiful, specific pencil sketch of a Dalmatian on a... The Xerox machine literally photocopies my exact specific lines with all my human intent onto a clear celluloid sheet so it can be painted.
Right, it's a direct copy.
Yes, it is a one-to-one mechanical replication of my human labor. Generative AI, from everything we know about latent diffusion models, does not do that.
No, it absolutely...
If you feed it a prompt, it is synthesizing entirely new frames. It is making micro decisions about line weight, shadow, perspective, and movement based on a massive data set of other people's art. How can BuzzFeed claim that generating new visual interpretations via an algorithm is the same thing as a glorified photocopier?
It's huge.
Where is the actual line between a tool that assists me and a replacement that makes artistic decisions for me?
You have just articulated the central philosophical and legal battleground of the entire generative AI movement. You are absolutely correct to challenge the analogy. A tool, in the classical sense, extends human physical capability without altering the origin of the intent.
Right.
A hammer allows a carpenter to drive a nail with more force. A Xerox machine allows a studio to transfer an image with more speed. But in both scenarios, the human's physical action and singular artistic intent remain the sole origin point of the final product.
The human is making every choice.
Yes, generative AI introduces a layer of synthetic interpretation that has never existed before. As you noted, the machine is parsing latent space, essentially mathematically predicting what the next frame should look like based on millions of prior examples. It is synthesizing a result, not merely replicating one.
Right. A Xerox machine doesn't look at my drawing of a cupcake and decide, well, based on 10,000 other drawings of baked goods I've analyzed, the smile should actually be a little whiter and the frosting should have a slightly different specular highlight.
Exactly.
The AI is making aesthetic.
Precisely. And this distinction is exactly why animators feel an existential threat. If the software is actively making aesthetic decisions, even minor ones regarding lighting or in-between motion, it has crossed the boundary from assistant to autonomous creator. It is encroaching on the territory of the artist.
Which is terrifying if that's your livelihood.
However, to examine BuzzFeed's defense objectively, we have to look at how a studio director might view this workflow.
Okay, how do they see it?
If a human showrunner is writing the script, designing the initial reference character, prompting the AI, curating the output, rejecting the flawed frames, and guiding the final composite, that executive will argue that the AI is functioning as an incredibly complex, fast, but ultimately subordinate tool.
Because the human is still technically steering the ship.
Right. The human is the director, the AI is the incredibly fast non-union crew. It is a semantic argument over the definition of creation, but how we legally define that word moving forward will dictate the future of global copyright law.
It's a complete legal minefield. And while Lauren Brandt represents the idealistic creator, fighting a desperate battle against this system to protect the soul of her character, there is another major figure caught in this Amazon controversy who represents the exact opposite approach.
Yes, the pragmatic approach.
Right. He is the ultimate industry pragmatist, someone who is choosing to actively work within this controversial. That brings us to the mystery of Jorge Gutierrez and his project, Punky.
This is perhaps the most nuanced and divisive aspect of the entire situation. Jorge Gutierrez is not some inexperienced tech bro trying to disrupt Hollywood.
No, he's a legend.
He is a deeply entrenched, highly respected veteran animation director. He created critically acclaimed works like The Book of Life and the Nickelodeon series El Tigre. He spent decades building goodwill and deep personal roots within the traditional animation community.
Which is why this was such a huge deal.
Exactly. Therefore, seeing his name headlining the Amazon Gen AI Creators Fund sent an absolute shockwave through the industry.
The backlash against him has been staggering. The commentary we reviewed highlighted some of the direct responses he was getting from his peers and former fans, and they did not hold back at all.
I got very personal. Very fast.
Yeah, he was widely labeled a sellout. People were accusing him of abandoning every artistic principle he ever stood for. One particularly brutal comment simply read, "Amazon's checks have a lot of zeros, and he knows how to survive."
Ouch.
Yeah. There was also a very specific piece of jargon thrown around in the backlash. People accused him of being goat washed, or that this project was just going to be goat washing. What exactly does that mean in this context?
So goat washing is a pejorative slang term that has rapidly gained traction in the digital art community. It refers to the deceptive practice of generating a piece of art entirely using AI and then having a human artist do a very quick superficial pass over it.
Like fixing a weirdly generated hand or tweaking a color gradient?
Exactly. Just enough so they can publicly claim the artwork was human-made or human-assisted, thus washing away the stigma of the AI generation. The critics are accusing Gutierrez of providing cover for Amazon. They believe his respected name is being used to goat wash a fully automated corporate pipeline to make it palatable to the public.
So they see him as crossing a massive moral picket line.
Yes, essentially breaking a strike.
But Gutierrez did not stay silent. He released a detailed defense of his involvement. He framed his participation in the Amazon fund as a grand necessary experiment. He claims he's proceeding with extreme caution, and his stated philosophy is that artists must drive the tech, not the other way around.
He wants a seat at the table.
Right. He wants to be in the room shaping how the tool is used rather than waiting for executives to impose it on. But the detail in his defense that really caught my attention was his timeline.
Yes, the 2 months.
Yeah. He mentioned that his pitch for Punky Duck was greenlit by Amazon in just 2 months, and he explicitly called that a miracle for an original idea in today's climate.
That specific word, miracle, is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lift, and it exposes the brutal economic reality of pitching in modern Hollywood. We have to look at the macro environment segment of the industry right now.
Which is pretty bleak.
Very bleak. The traditional animation pipeline is currently in a state of near paralysis. Following the streaming wars bubble bursting, budgets have severely contracted. Studios are incredibly risk-averse, resulting in a holding pattern where thousands of talented professionals are out of work because nothing new is being greenlit.
So the well is completely dry for original ideas.
Completely dry. Taking a massive financial swing on a quirky, unknown original property like a show called Punky is a non-starter for almost every major studio today.
They just won't fund it.
No. If Gutierrez walked into an executive suite and pitched that show traditionally, which would require a 4-year development cycle, a massive budget, and hundreds of union animators, the answer would almost certainly be a polite rejection.
So what's the alternative?
The unavoidable, uncomfortable truth of this situation is that Gutierrez's willingness to utilize the Gen AI fund, thereby drastically slashing the production budget and shrinking the timeline to a fraction of the norm, is likely the sole reason Punky exists as a greenlit project.
So he made a Faustian bargain. He traded the purity of the traditional human-driven animation process for the reality of actually getting his art funded and onto a screen.
That's the trade-off.
It brings up such a profound dilemma for any creator. Is it better to produce your art using methods you might find compromised, or to stand on your principles and never have your art made at all?
It's the classic artist's dilemma.
It reminds me of an indie musician who spends years playing dive bars, prizing the raw, unedited sound of their garage. Suddenly, a massive major label offers them a life-changing, multi-million-dollar record.
But there's a catch.
Right. The executive slides the contract across the desk and says, "We'll sign you, we'll make you a star, but you have to use aggressive auto-tune and algorithmic drum beats on every single track because that's what the Spotify algorithm demands." Does the purity of the recording method matter more than the fact that your song is finally going to be heard by millions?
That is the existential question at the heart of commercial art. And the polarized reaction to Gutierrez illustrates how deeply divided the community is on the answer. You have purists who fiercely believe that the human method is the art, and that outsourcing any part of that expression to an algorithm intrinsically taints the final product.
They see it as corrupt.
Completely. But on the other side, you have industry veterans who are defending Gutierrez's pragmatism. The commentary highlighted a statement from John Fountain, a highly experienced figure in the animation world.
Yeah, John Fountain's intervention was fascinating because he really tried to de-escalate the personal attacks.
He was trying to be the voice of reason.
Right. He basically came out and said, look, I personally despise generative AI. I have been very vocal about my opposition to it, but Jorge Gutierrez is my friend. He is a kind, talented human being, and I absolutely refuse to let differing professional opinions on a new technology destroy a real-world friend.
Which is a very human response.
It is. He went so far as to call out the mob mentality of the internet, referring to the people demanding that he publicly disown Gutierrez as a throbbing, bloodthirsty.
Fountain is highlighting a crucial psychological element that frequently gets lost in the frictionless environment of digital art. The professional animation industry is actually quite small and insular.
Everyone knows everything.
Exactly. Personal relationships, trust, and reputation matter immensely. What Fountain is arguing against is the dangerous escalation of equating a ruthless business decision, even a highly controversial one about adopting threatening technology, with a fundamental, irredeemable moral failing.
He's saying you can separate the art from the artist's business model.
Right. He is asserting that you can vehemently disagree with the mechanics of how a show is funded without dehumanizing the artist who chose that path out of a need for professional survival.
Professional survival. That really is the core driver here.
Almost always.
Because the more I look at the history provided in this breakdown, the more I realize that this brutal tension between the artistic purity of the creator and the ruthless budget of the studio is not a new phenomenon invented by Silicon Valley.
Not even close.
Right. If we want to understand where AI is inevitably taking animation, we have to look backward at how financial survival has historically dictated the very nature of the medium.
Absolutely. The history of animation is fundamentally a history of innovative cost-cutting. We have to strip away the romanticism for a moment, but the analysis makes a very blunt, incredibly accurate observation. Animation is a luxury item for a studio.
It's not a necessity.
No, it is not an essential human need. And unlike live action, where you can occasionally film 2 actors in a room on a shoestring budget, animation is inherently prohibitively expensive and incredibly time-consuming. Therefore, whenever a studio hits financial turbulence, the animation department is almost universally the first place executives look to / budget.
When the corporate chips are down, the cartoons are the first things thrown over.
Every single time.
And looking at the timeline, there are these distinct historical cycles where the industry desperately had to find ways to keep keep the medium alive by making it cheaper, even if it meant compromising the art. The breakdown goes deep into the television animation boom of the 1960s and 70s.
Fascinating era.
We all remember those incredibly cheap-looking cartoons where a character would run past the exact same background tree, rock, and cloud 12 times.
Oh, yeah. Hanna-Barbera is the quintessential example of that era's economic reality. They pioneered what is known as limited animation,
Which was basically just a massive shortcut.
a necessary one. In the golden age of theatrical short, animators drew 24 unique frames for every single second of screen time to create lush, fluid movement. Hanna-Barbera realized that television budgets couldn't support that.
So they just drew less.
Exactly. They minimized the number of unique drawing. They would hold a character's body completely static on screen and only animate the mouth moving, or they would loop a 3-frame walk cycle endlessly over a panning back.
Just to fill the time.
Right. They didn't do this because they lacked the talent to do full animation. They did it because the economics of television required them to produce hundreds of hours of content at a fraction of the theatrical cost. If they had refused to compromise the purity of the art form, iconic characters like the Flintstones or Yogi Bear simply would not exist.
The economic constraint birthed the aesthetic.
Precisely.
And then the analysis moves into the 1980s, where the only reason the sheer volume of animation expanded was because the funding model shifted entirely.
Right, the toy era.
Yeah, the shows were no longer funded by network licensing fees. They were essentially bankrolled by massive toy companies as 30-minute syndicated commercials. He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe. These shows existed primarily to sell molded plastic action, and that merchandise revenue is what funded the animation.
The tail was completely wagging the dog.
Exactly. The funding model dictates the art, and we cannot pretend that even Disney, the gold standard of the art form, was immune to these brutal economic cycles.
Disney had some very dark.
Right. Following the death of Walt Disney, the studio entered what is often called its dark, a long period of severe financial loss. The commentary explicitly notes how Disney survived by aggressively recycling their own past to save money.
Which is wild to think about.
It's the part that always blows my mind. If you look closely at a film like Robin Hood from 1970, you can see scenes where Little John's movements are literally traced directly over the animation of Baloo from The Jungle Book. They just changed the bear design slightly.
It's the exact same dance sequence.
Yes. Or the dancing scenes in the Aristocats, heavily reusing the mechanics from Snow White. They were recycling their own legacy just to shave days off the production schedule.
And that ties directly back to their reliance on the Xerox technology we discussed earlier. They used Xerox to bypass the expensive, time-consuming hand inking department.
So they just copied the rough sketches.
Right. This is why Disney films from the 60s and 70s have those rough, scratchy, heavily penciled outlines around the characters. They literally couldn't afford the human labor required to clean the lines up perfectly.
Wow.
And even with all of those extreme shortcuts, the financial tightrope was incredibly thin. The analysis points out that the production of The Black Cauldron in the mid-1980s was such a massive financial disaster that it nearly resulted in the Walt Disney Company shutting down their feature animation department entirely.
The threat of extinction has always hovered over.
Always.
It provides so much content. The breakdown also draws a direct parallel between the current panic over generative AI and the massive industry upheaval we saw during the transition from traditional 2D hand-drawn animation to 3D computer-generated animation in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Which was another period of immense panic.
People were terrified back then, too. There were massive protests that computers were going to destroy the soul of animation.
And we must acknowledge that for many professionals, that transition was genuinely catastrophic. Thousands of jobs for traditional cleanup artists and ink and paint specialists simply vanished.
Overnight.
Yeah. Traditional skill sets that took decades to master were suddenly devalued, and a completely new digital paradigm was established. However, there is a fundamental difference between the CG revolution and the AI revolution, which is why the current anxiety is so acute.
What's the main difference?
Moving to 3D CG still required massive armies of human artists to build the models, rig the skeletons, light the scenes, and painstakingly manipulate the digital puppets frame by frame. The profound fear with generative AI is that the algorithm isn't just offering a new type of puppet, it is attempting to replace the puppeteer entirely.
So what does this all mean? Following the logic of these historical cycles, if a studio can suddenly use AI to produce an animated series for a third of the cost, what does that mean for the actual art we get?
It's double-edged.
Is it possible that extreme financial constraint might actually be a good thing for creativity? If Jorge Gutierrez can get a weird project like Punky greenlit solely because cheap, does that mean we might enter an era where we get more diverse, niche, highly experimental shows that would have never survived boardroom process?
If we look at it strictly from a consumer volume standpoint, yes. Drastically lowering the barrier to entry financially usually triggers an explosion in the sheer volume of content.
Because the risk is silly low.
Exactly. If an original series no longer requires a $20 million investment and a team of 200 people, a studio can afford to take risks on highly specific, unconventional story. A streaming service might greenlight a bizarre, niche sci-fi show because they don't need it to attract 10 million viewers to break even. They only need it to attract 500,000.
So we could theoretically see a renaissance of diverse visual storytelling?
We could, but, and this is the crucial pivot, that abundance comes with a massive, unavoidable shadow.
Right. Let's talk about the dark side of that equation. Because making a show cheaper isn't just about spending less money on server space or rendering times.
No, it's about payroll.
A production budget is primarily made up of salaries. Slashing the cost fundamentally means slashing the human beings getting paid to do the work. Which brings us to the bleakest, most sobering part of this entire deep dive, the impending corporate walled garden and the brutal forecast for the future of the animation workforce.
The economic reality laid out in this analysis is stark and uncompromising.
It's pretty grim.
Very grim. If proprietary AI pipelines can successfully shave off a third of the production cost, which is the conservative estimate currently floating around Hollywood, that directly and immediately translates to eliminating a third or potentially much more of the human workforce on any given production.
The commentary we were looking at was actually incredibly blunt about the vulnerability of the current workforce. They argued that the modern animation industry has become somewhat structurally bloated over the last decade of the streaming boom.
It's a controversial point, but a valid one.
Yeah, they threw out a very controversial take stating that right now, everyone and their brother is a storyboard artist or a pre-production designer living in Los Angeles, while the actual heavy lifting of drawing the final frames keenly shipped overseas to be done cheaply in studios across Asia.
It is a harsh assessment that will undoubtedly anger many professionals, but it highlights a structural vulnerability that makes the industry incredibly susceptible to AI disruption.
Because it's so top-heavy.
Exactly. For decades, the Western animation model has relied on a vast, top-heavy hire pre-production artists, character designers, storyboard revisionists, layout artists, and color coordinators. They design the blueprint and then hand off the labor-intensive execution to cheaper overseas labor.
Okay, so how does AI disrupt that?
Generative AI threatens to completely collapse that entire pipeline. If a director can input a rough text prompt or a very basic sketch, and an AI can instantly generate a fully rendered, fully lit, on-model background or character pose, the entire middle layer of that human hierarchy is rendered structurally redundant.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand the mechanics collapse. When you say the middle layer is redundant, how exactly does the AI cause that Thanos snap of job? Who exactly vanishes from the credit show?
Well, let's trace the traditional pipe. A lead designer creates a character. A storyboard artist blocks out the scene. Then, a layout artist figures out the exact perspective.
Okay, so far.
Then a rough animator draws the basic movement. A cleanup artist refines those messy lines into perfect, solid stroke. A colorist fills in the palettes. A compositor adds lighting and shadows.
That's a lot of people.
It is. Now, if you integrate a highly advanced generative AI model, the showrunner still exists to prompt the machine. The lead designer still exists to establish the initial aesthetic. And perhaps a few final cleanup artists exist at the very end to fix the AI's mistakes.
So what about everyone else?
But the layout artist, gone. The rough animator, gone. The colorist and compositor, mostly gone. The AI bridges the gap between the initial idea and the final render, evaporating the massive middle tier of human execution.
That is terrifying. And what makes it even more darn for the independent creator is this concept of the corporate AI walled garden.
This is the real danger for the indie scene.
Yeah, the breakdown makes a very compelling point. Right now, the AI debate is centered on public tools like Midjourney or DALL-E, which anyone can mess around with. But those public toys are not what the major studios are building.
Not at all. The public tools are trained on scraped, legally questionable internet data, which makes their output a copyright nightmare.
Right. The studios can't use that.
Exactly. What the major corporations are doing, and the trend lines absolutely confirm this, is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build massive proprietary AI engines internal to their own servers.
And what is the fuel for these internal? It is their own massive, legally pristine, historically unrivaled intellectual property libraries.
It's the ultimate training data.
Disney will feed nearly a century of proprietary animation data, like every single frame of Snow White, every background from The Lion King, right into their closed machine. Amazon will feed the entire history of MGM's catalog.
So they are training a bespoke AI algorithm on the absolute best, most iconic, highest quality art in the history of the world. And they exclusively own all the legal rights to that training data.
Which completely solves the copyright.
Correct. Their legal ownership of the training data inoculates them against copyright lawsuit. And once those professional-grade, highly tuned, legally bulletproof tools are operational, they will lock them tightly behind corporate firewalls.
A walled garden.
Exactly. They will ensure that, as the commentary rather bluntly phrased it, the plebes, meaning the independent creators and small competing studios, cannot access them.
So the independent artist trying to make a show on YouTube will have access to a generic AI trained on whatever public domain data is left, producing generic results.
While the studio artist inside the walled garden will have access to an AI trained on the collective curated genius of Disney's entire history, capable of instantly generating perfect, flawless studio quality assets.
The competitive moat created by that disparity utterly insurmountable.
A completely unbridgeable gap between the corporate machine and the indie artist.
It is incredibly depressing. And the final advice the commentary gives to current animation students and professionals facing this reality is just, well, it's brutal.
It's very blunt.
They literally use the phrase, a Thanos snap of job. They are predicting that half the industry, or more, will simply vanish.
And their forecast suggests that in this new paradigm, there might only be room for about 10% of the current workforce.
Just 10%?
Yeah. They argue that the only ones who will survive are the exceptionally talented, the highly entrepreneurial, and those nimble enough to completely abandon traditional drafting to become AI drivers and prompt engineers.
And for the remaining 90%, the idealists who refuse to adapt or who simply aren't in that ruthless top percentile.
The advice offered in the breakdown is painfully, unapologetically pragmatic. They said, put the fries in the bag.
Oh, man.
Basically, go find an adjacent industry, find a job with stability, secure your health insurance, pay your bills, and resign yourself to doing your pure, uncompromised art on the side as a hobby.
I have to challenge this absolute brutal pragmatism, though. I understand the economic forces at play, but are we not in danger of treating human artists entirely like an assembly line?
It certainly feels that way.
Are we really just demanding they become mechanical operators of a prompt box? The commentary talks at length about the harsh difference between wide-eyed, childlike idealism and hitting the brick wall of adulthood.
Which is a transition every artist has to make eventually.
But I have to ask, if we completely beat that idealism out of the artist, if we look them in the eye and say, you are no longer an artist, you are a cog tasked with managing an algorithm to produce a cheap product, don't we fundamentally damage the very heart of why we love cartoons in the first place?
Touching on the soul of the medium here.
Don't we lose the specific human soul that compelled Lauren Brandt to draw that cupcake to begin?
You have identified the profound tragedy at the very center of this technological shift. The underlying argument of the corporate survivalist is that creators must view their work strictly as a product to be sold, which allows them to detach emotionally when the corporation inevitably exerts control or alters the pipeline.
But art, particularly animation, is rarely successful without immense emotional investment.
Exactly. It requires that childlike idealism to resonate deeply with an audience, to create characters that endure for generations. If the industry structure forces artists to become cynical, pragmatic machine operators just to keep a roof over their heads, you risk fundamentally sterilizing the art form.
Which would be a massive loss for culture.
It would be. The Thanos snap isn't just a reduction in headcount. It is potentially snapping away the quirky, inefficient, profoundly human imperfections that make animation magical in the first place.
It is a heavy, monumental reality to process, and it feels like we are only in the opening chapters of this transformation. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by dissecting Amazon MGM's aggressive, highly public push into AI and revealing how the Gen AI Creators Fund is less about making cartoons and more about signaling to their corporate rivals that a new era of cost-cutting has begun.
The smokestack, essentially.
Yeah. Right. And then we explored the devastating, heartbreaking reality of intellectual property law through the lens of Lauren Brandt and her Good Advice Cupcake, illustrating how personal creations can be legally severed from their creators and fed into a machine to satisfy a struggling corporation's need for liquid assets.
And from there, we analyzed the complex survival tactics of veterans like Jorge Gutierrez,
who is navigating the frozen, impossible economics of modern Hollywood by making the deeply controversial choice to embrace the very technology peers revile simply to get his original ideas funded.
Exactly. And we zoomed all the way out to examine the unstoppable economic tide, tracing the historical cycles of cost-cutting from Hanna-Barbera to the Disney Dark Age that prove this tension is eternal.
We are currently witnessing a massive, painful contraction in the workforce, potentially leaving us in a world where proprietary corporate walled garden dictate exact art.
And this matters to you, the listener, profoundly, even if you never plan to draw a single frame of animation or step foot in Hollywood.
Why should they care?
Because this isn't just an insider industry spat about software. This represents a fundamental seismic shift in how the culture you consume is manufactured, the stories that will shape your worldview, the animated characters your children will fall in love with. The very origin of those ideas is changing.
It's all shifting.
It is. This situation serves as a vital, real-world masterclass on the eternal tension between the human desire to create out of passion and the cold mechanical reality of producing a corporate product for a balance sheet. The entertainment landscape is shifting permanently beneath your feet.
It really is. The ground is moving. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building directly on that Xerox BuzzFeed tried to use earlier.
Oh, right, the photocopy defense.
Right. They insisted that AI is just a tool, like a copy machine, operated by a human to create. But let's extrapolate. Let's look 5 or 10 years. What happens when the proprietary AI inside that walled garden gets so incredibly advanced that it is the one coming up with the good advice?
When it starts ideating on its own?
Yes. Imagine a scenario where a human studio executive simply types a 5-word prompt into an Amazon machine that says, make a funny cartoon about a baked good.
And the machine just does the rest.
The AI instantly generates the entire script, designs a brand new character, renders the lighting, and animates a full 22-minute episode. Who truly owns that copyright?
That is the million-dollar question.
Is it the human executive who casually typed the sentence? Is it the team of software engineers who spent years building the algorithm? Or, terrifyingly, does the machine itself hold the claim to this? We are walking blindly into a legal minefield regarding the definition of human authorship that hasn't even been mapped yet, and is just waiting to explode.
That is the uncharted frontier we are rapidly approaching, and the legal battles over that exact question will define the next century of art.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes open, keep supporting the human art that moves you, and always keep questioning the mechanics behind the information and the media around you.